All right, let's dive right into this explainer and uncover the actual secret to building true, lasting emotional resilience. We live in a world that is just completely obsessed with quick fixes, life hacks, and those overnight success stories. But if you stop and think about the most genuinely resilient people you know, the ones who seem to weather absolutely any storm without losing their footing, you'll quickly realize their strength definitely didn't come from some weekend workshop. So, what is it that actually gives them that incredible, unwavering stability? Well, today, we're going to visually map out exactly how that works and look at why true stability requires a radically different approach from what society usually preaches. It's a fundamental question that honestly we've all probably asked ourselves at some point. Why do some people just completely crumble under the absolute slightest bit of criticism, while others stand completely unshaken during life's massive disasters? I mean, we've all seen people who look incredibly successful on the outside completely fall apart when real disaster strikes. Why does that happen? We're going to explore why visible success doesn't always equal inner strength, and how you can actually develop an immovable heart to navigate absolutely any challenge that gets thrown your way. Because the truth is, what we see on the surface, that rarely tells the whole story of a person's true ability to withstand hardship. We're pulling these fascinating insights directly from a book titled Fudoshin. Now, that term translates to an unshakable or immovable mind. And it's super important to clarify what that actually means right off the bat. It's not about stubbornness or just rigidly refusing to change your opinions. Not at all. Rather, it points to a profound inner peace and a truly unwavering core. The author presents this framework for building a character so deeply strong that it remains entirely unaffected by external praise or harsh criticism. It's about creating a foundational structural stability that comes entirely from within, rather than relying on fickle external validation. Today, we're going to focus specifically on Chapter 1, which brilliantly illustrates the concept of human resilience using the incredibly evocative metaphor of an iceberg in the ocean. And let me tell you, it's a real game changer for how you view personal growth. It's so powerful because it perfectly visualizes the relationship between what the world sees, the flashy, visible stuff, and what actually provides our genuine strength. Let's look at exactly how this works and why it just makes so much sense. Okay, Part 1. The visible tip. Let's start our journey right at the surface, looking at what the world actually sees of us every single day. This is the part of our lives exposed to the sunlight, the wind, and, the harsh judgment of others. So the crucial point in this metaphor is the math. A surprisingly tiny fraction, we're talking only 10 to 20% of an iceberg, is actually visible above the water. When we look out at the ocean, we see this seemingly small block of ice bobbing in the waves, and we naturally assume, yep, that's the whole shebang. But that visual is completely deceptive. It hides the massive reality of what's keeping it afloat. And the author argues that it's exactly the same with people. We look at someone's life, we see their visible 10%, and we mistakenly think we know their entire story. This comparison brilliantly illustrates the contrast between the superficial things people judge us by versus the massive, silent effort we put in every day behind closed doors. The visible tip? That's your job title. It's your fame, the immediate successes you post on social media, that shiny car in the driveway. And hey, the world absolutely applauds the trophy. But what they don't see are the thousands of silent hours spent studying, the embarrassing failures, and all that quiet grit. That is your 80 to 90%. That is the unseen depth. It's the daily learning, the painful missteps you've analyzed in private, and all that immense silent effort that absolutely nobody claps for. Moving right along to Part 2, accumulating the unseen. Let's actually take a deep dive beneath the surface to explore what makes up that massive, unseen underwater block of ice. Because think about it, if the top is only 10 to 20%, what is happening with the other 80 to 90%? Well, it literally comes down to physics. If you want a higher peak above the water, you don't build up, you have to build down. Just like a real iceberg, it is this massive, unseen accumulation that displaces the water and creates the vital buoyancy needed to float stably. The source material notes that the sheer volume of ice pushing the water away underneath is exactly what generates the upward force, the buoyancy, to keep that visible tip high and incredibly stable. In life, your unseen efforts are exactly what generate your emotional buoyancy. So how do we actually build this? Expanding this invisible foundation isn't about massive, flashy events or life-altering epiphanies. Actually, scratch that. It's built through quiet, relentless daily habits. It's about daily reading and actively absorbing new knowledge. It's about taking the time to reflect deeply on why you failed yesterday, instead of just burying the embarrassment and quickly moving on. The text explicitly points to studying historical heavyweights, figures like Confucius, Jesus, or Socrates. The idea here is that by reading their words and actively absorbing their accumulated wisdom, you aren't just memorizing facts. You are literally adding massive blocks of ice to your own underwater foundation. You are borrowing their strength to drastically increase your own emotional buoyancy. Now, this is super interesting. The text introduces this fascinating concept called moyo no yo, which translates roughly to the use of the useless. It highlights how learning seemingly useless things acts like a crucial safety net. The source uses a brilliant analogy here. Imagine a tightrope walker. Walking on a rope laid directly on the ground, piece of cake. Anyone can do it. But take that exact same rope, string it high up between two towering rooftops, and suddenly the empty space around it matters intensely. That empty or unused knowledge, the obscure history, the dense philosophy, the broad education that you might not technically use at your 9-to-5 job every single day, acts just like a balance pole for that tightrope walker. It creates a wide, invisible safety net of perspective that keeps your mind perfectly balanced and stable when you're walking a high wire in life and the winds really start to howl.
All right, part 3, weathering the storms.
Because look, building this deep foundation isn't just some fun intellectual exercise for a calm, sunny day. It is strictly for survival. We see this vividly as we bring ourselves back up to the surface, right as a massive storm of hardship hits. The source compares navigating life's roughest waves to an Antarctic icebreaker ship. When navigating a frozen sea, an icebreaker must continuously extract lessons, adapt, and keep its engines moving forward. If an icebreaker stops moving, if it stalls out in the middle of a freeze, the ice rapidly thickens around the hull, trapping the ship entirely. Life is the exact same way. You have to keep pushing, constantly extracting meaning and learning from every single wave and block of ice that hits you. Otherwise, you risk getting completely frozen in place by your problems, just paralyzed by hardship. The text shares a profound historical example of this immovable mindset in action. When Thomas Edison's famous laboratory tragically burned down to the ground, years of incredible, highly visible work completely destroyed in a single devastating night, he didn't panic. He didn't break down or curse his luck. He reportedly stood there watching the flames consume his life's visible work and simply said, "I can start from zero again." Why? How on earth could anyone be so remarkably calm? Because his true foundation, his intellect, his hard-earned resilience, all those hours of silent study, was completely underwater. The fire couldn't even touch it. He hadn't lost anything that truly mattered to his ability to rebuild. His iceberg was still massively buoyant.
Which brings us to part 4, the unshakable mind.
Let's tie this whole thing together to understand the ultimate state of Fudoshin. What does it actually mean to have an immovable mind in the modern world? Well, it reveals a stark contrast. A fragile mindset, that is frantic. It's emotionally volatile and absolutely terrified of losing its visible status because, well, that 10% on top is literally all they have. They spend all their time polishing the tip of the ice, so if you knock it off, they instantly sink. But the Fudoshin mindset is completely different. It possesses this deep, calm buoyancy. Like Edison, people with immense unseen accumulation are unafraid. They know for a fact that even if the visible tip is completely sheared off by disaster, their massive unseen accumulation will simply push a brand new piece of ice above the water. They're entirely self-reliant and unshakable from the inside out. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a powerful, provocative question to chew on regarding where you invest your daily energy. Are you spending all your time frantically polishing the tiny visible tip of your iceberg, desperately trying to make it look perfect for everyone else to see? Or are you dedicating yourself to doing the quiet, unglamorous, unseen work in the depths? Are you reading, reflecting, and learning when absolutely no one is watching? Remember, if you want to stand tall above the waves, you don't build up, you build down. The deeper your unseen foundation, the more unshakable you become against the unpredictable storms of life. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's explainer. I am so pumped you're joining us because we're unpacking a truly fascinating framework today, specifically focusing on Chapter 2, the principle of accumulation. We're going to explore how the seemingly totally mundane moments of our daily lives are actually the exact building blocks for some profound, unshakable mental strength. We'll be diving deep into how gathering knowledge, facing setbacks, and really reflecting on our experiences can fundamentally transform who we are. So let's just dive right in.
I want to kick things off by throwing a question your way. Are you just passing time today, or are you accumulating? It's kind of a provocative thought, right? You know, we so often think about our lives purely in terms of these grand milestones, graduations, big promotions, major life events. But the philosophy we're looking at today completely flips that on its head. It basically asks us to look at this exact Tuesday or Thursday or whatever day it happens to be for you right now and realize that the quiet hours of today are literally shaping the ultimate foundation of your character.
Our source material for this explainer is a really compelling text called Fudoshin, which translates to Unshakable Mind by Ryuho Okawa. Right from the jump, the author gives us this brilliant visual metaphor. He says an unshakable mind isn't something you just magically achieve overnight. It's exactly like an iceberg. The part you actually see above the water, the composure, the wisdom, the outward strength, that is completely reliant on a massive, unseen foundation built way down deep below the surface. And how exactly do you build that submerged ice? Through the quiet, relentless, daily process of accumulation.
All right, Section 1, the meaning of today or building the iceberg. To actually construct this iceberg, we've got to totally reevaluate how we view a single 24-hour period. Life is really just a continuum of single days. Think about it. You don't live a whole life all at once. You only ever live a today. To drive this home, the text references that famous quote from Jesus, "Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." Now, what's super interesting is how the author interprets this. It essentially means the struggles, the anxieties, the mundane tasks of today, those are exactly what you need to be focusing on. How we handle today's distinct, immediate challenges is what determines our entire overarching life path. We can't control tomorrow, and we sure can't edit yesterday. Our absolute only point of power, our only chance to accumulate ice for our iceberg is right now.
Moving right along to Section 2, Power of the Useless and the Art of Charging.
So, if daily life is all about accumulation, what exactly are we accumulating? Well, we're basically charging our mental and spiritual batteries through continuous input and learning. Let's look at the number 300. The text notes that over the course of just a single decade, the author published over 300 books. That's huge. People constantly asked him, how is it even possible to produce that much without running completely dry? His answer was incredibly simple, but really profound. He said the well never ran dry, simply because he absorbed way more than he ever put out.
And this leads us to a really fundamental principle in the text, the balance of charging versus discharging. You absolutely cannot discharge, meaning output, produce, or give your energy to others, more than you've charged up through learning and experiencing. The author compares this directly to your bank account. Just like you can't spend more cash than you actually have without going into debt, you can't output continuous wisdom or creative energy without consistently accumulating knowledge first.
But here is where the source introduces a totally counterintuitive yet amazing idea. It's called the utility of the useless. In our modern, super efficiency-obsessed world, we usually only want to learn things that have a direct, immediate, practical application, right? But the text argues that acquiring knowledge or going through experiences that seem completely useless in the moment is actually absolutely vital. Why? Because this useless accumulation creates this massive safety margin in your mind. It buffers you against life's sudden, unexpected shocks.
The author uses this perfect metaphor to explain it, a tightrope walker. Picture a tightrope walker doing their thing way up high. Down below them is a wide safety net. Now, the walker never actually steps on that net. So, in a purely functional mechanical sense, while they're walking, the net is technically useless. But psychologically, the mere presence of that unstepped-upon net is exactly what gives the walker the mental balance and the confidence they need to actually cross the wire. In the exact same way, your accumulated, useless knowledge acts as your psychological safety net.
Okay, on to Section 3, Suffering as a Whetstone, Polishing the Soul.
So, what actually happens when the tightrope walker falls? A really crucial concept in this framework is finding your bottom. The source impartially observes that reaching rock bottom, whether that's through a severe illness, losing a job, or going through a devastating heartbreak, it actually serves a profoundly important purpose. It acts as a whetstone. It's literally designed to polish the soul. It lets a person solidify the absolute ground of their mind. Because once you finally hit the bottom and realize, okay, I literally cannot fall any further, you discover exactly how much you can endure. That rock bottom, that becomes the new, unshakable foundation of your iceberg. During these dark periods of hardship or obscurity, the text advises some deep, deep patience. It shares this great quote from the historical Japanese figure Katsu Kaishu. He essentially said, if you are truly a person of value, society is eventually going to need you, so wait 7 or 10 years if you have to. The big takeaway here is that when you feel sidelined by life, you shouldn't just despair. Instead, you've got to use that quiet, painful time to patiently polish your inner self, accumulate your strength while you're waiting in the wings. On the flip side, what happens if we suffer but we don't have this mindset of accumulation? The text gives us this rather stark, cautionary metaphor of a fly trapped in a glass box. Without the wisdom to actually understand the purpose of their suffering, people in distress act exactly like this fly. They just blindly bounce around the box, constantly banging their heads against the glass of their own complaints, their unfulfilled desires, and resentments. They are entirely unaware of the much bigger picture of their own spiritual growth. To sum up the text's stance on this, our true character is not visible when things are just okay. No way. It's revealed entirely at the extreme poles of life, at the dizzying absolute peak of success, and at the crushing bottom of despair. Drawing some parallels to the biblical figure Job, the author asserts that true spiritual endurance is tested when our fortunes dramatically, suddenly shift. Can you actually remain humble when you're at the top and still stay hopeful when you're at the bottom? That right there is the mark of an accumulated, unshakable mind. Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, Sharing Wisdom with Others and the Cycle of Reproduction. This is probably the most uplifting point of the whole framework. What is the ultimate purpose of all this personal resilience we've been building? The source is incredibly insistent about this. Accumulation is never, ever meant for selfish hoarding. Gathering vast knowledge, surviving terrible hardships, building this strong mind, it must never end in just mere self-satisfaction. I mean, if your iceberg only exists to make you feel superior to everyone else, you've kind of missed the point of the philosophy entirely. Instead, the text heavily encourages readers to leave behind a real legacy. It uses the phrase, storing treasures in heaven, which it defines as acting with pure intentions to truly be of service to a greater good. All that knowledge you accumulate and the hard-won lessons you pull from your suffering, they are meant to be left behind as vital nourishment for future generations. You're basically building a guiding light for the people who are going to walk the path after you. Let's quickly walk through how this entire cycle operates in practice. Step 1. You actively gain knowledge and varied life experiences. Step 2. Inevitably, you're going to face setbacks and suffering, but you use them as a whetstone. Step 3. Through deep reflection, you synthesize those raw experiences into profound personal wisdom. And finally, Step 4. You reproduce that wisdom. You teach, you guide, and you actively apply what you've learned strictly for the happiness and betterment of others. Basically, raw experience goes in, and collective human elevation comes out. And that brings us to our final thought. I really want to turn this philosophical framework directly back onto you for a second. Think about the struggles you face today, or maybe that random bit of useless knowledge you picked up earlier. Ask yourself, how will you reproduce today's experiences for someone else tomorrow? Because every single day is a chance to add to your iceberg, and ultimately, it's a chance to become someone else's safety net. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep accumulating out there, and I'll see you next time.
Welcome to today's explainer. We are jumping right into a really profound toolkit today, specifically focusing on Chapter 3 from our source material, which is all about confronting distress in life. Our goal here is to equip you with practical ways to conquer modern anxiety and completely shift how you view your own daily struggles. Okay, let's dive into this with a pretty massive question. Why are we so prone to suffering? I mean, we all know the feeling, right? Life's daily grind can feel deeply, deeply overwhelming. We're constantly battling stress and anxiety. But what is actually causing this baseline level of distress day in and day out? Well, the source gives a remarkably blunt answer. It says it's basically because we wallow in self-pity and we constantly compare ourselves to others. You see, our day-to-day distress doesn't usually stem from massive, earth-shattering tragedies. It actually comes from the exhausting habit of comparing our own success, our wealth, and our status to the people around us. It's that constant friction between our own feelings and the opinions of others. And you know, this anxiety of comparison takes a whole bunch of forms. Maybe it's fearing the loss of your social status. Maybe it's agonizing over a peer getting promoted faster than you, or letting outside opinions dictate your own self-worth. These are absolutely universal anxieties. We've all been there. But the text makes a harsh yet super necessary point here. If you rely entirely on external metrics for your happiness, you are setting yourself up for permanent unhappiness. If your joy depends on someone else's opinion, you're never truly in control. To put this into perspective, the source brings up a fascinating historical parable. Think of Alexander the Great. Here's a guy who literally conquered the known world, possessed ultimate power and massive wealth, and yet his desires were endless. He always wanted more. Now, compare him to the ancient philosopher Diogenes. Diogenes lived in a barrel. He possessed absolutely nothing. Yet, as the text notes, he was perfectly content and completely free. It's like the ultimate showdown between external validation and internal peace. The text recounts this legendary meeting between the two. Alexander the Great approaches Diogenes and essentially offers him anything he desires. He's the most powerful man on earth, right? And what does Diogenes say? Stand out of my sunlight. That's it. He rejected the most powerful man in the world simply because Alexander was blocking his sun. Diogenes didn't want palaces or money or status. His happiness was so perfectly self-contained that a world conqueror had absolutely nothing to offer him but to just get out of the way of the sunshine. And this brilliantly illustrates what Chapter 3 calls the kingdom of the mind. It's a mental state where your happiness is entirely self-determined. It is completely unaffected by changing external environments or the opinions of others. True power isn't conquering the physical world, it's ruling this inner world. Because if you are the absolute monarch of your own kingdom of the mind, no external failure or criticism can ever dethrone your happiness. So, the big question is, how do we actually achieve this? Well, the text outlines two actionable paths to resolving our distress, the macro and the micro. It argues that conquering life's daily mud requires both a wildly zoomed-out view of reality and an intensely zoomed-in focus on our daily actions. Let's take a look at the macro view first. The macro perspective can be summed up in this iconic, overarching mantra. The sun will rise again. I know it sounds super simple, maybe even a little cliché, but the text really asks us to reflect deeply on this truth. No matter how dark things seem right now, no matter how bad a failure feels today, the light inevitably returns. The sun setting is a fact, for sure, but its rising is an absolute guarantee. When you actually map this out, you start to grasp what's called the infinite viewpoint. Think about it. 1 year ago, the sun rose. Yesterday, the sun rose. Today, it rises. Tomorrow, it will rise again. When you view your life through this massive cosmic lens, that crushing workplace drama, or that financial hiccup, or that embarrassing social mistake you made, it all starts to look incredibly temporary. Your current troubles are just a brief shadow in a cycle of endless sunrises. Suddenly, the whole shebang feels a lot more manageable. But here is the catch. What do we actually do with our day when we are right in the middle of a crisis? If the macro view keeps us sane, the micro view tells us how to act. And the answer is pretty straightforward. Immerse yourself in the work at hand. When you face hardship, you don't panic. You just focus intimately on today's immediate tasks. The author gives us a highly practical guide for surviving the mud. Step 1. Stop grandstanding. When your pride is wounded, the absolute human instinct is to try and quickly fix it with some flashy move. Don't do it. Step 2. Avoid seeking external attention or validation when you fail. Seriously, don't go looking for sympathy or applause. And step 3, quietly immerse yourself in daily tasks and self-improvement. Just humbly focus on the grind. Don't dramatically overcompensate. Just do the work. I absolutely love this metaphor from the text. Recharge your internal battery away from public eyes. When you suffer a setback, your battery is drained. Trying to prove yourself to the rest of the world while you're running on empty is just going to lead to worse mistakes. True growth and true recovery during hard times happens quietly, far away from the spotlight. The text brings in another amazing piece of philosophical imagery here, finding peace in the mud, like Zhuangzi's pig. The ancient philosopher Zhuangzi famously said he would rather play joyfully in the mud like a pig than be burdened as a high-ranking minister of state. There is profound peace in just accepting a messy, simple reality. It is so much healthier than the exhausting, endless chase for high status and public approval. And all of this culminates in the core concept of our explainer today, Fudoshin, which translates to the immovable heart. It stands firm like a giant, unshakable tree. Surviving life's mud, quietly doing the work, and not relying on external praise is exactly how you build that deep, unseen root system. The wind might violently blow the branches around, but the trunk, it simply does not move. To really drive this home, the text shares a crazy historical anecdote about Thomas Edison. When Edison's laboratory, which literally contained his entire life's work, burned to the ground, he didn't despair. Actually, he calmly watched it burn and essentially said, I can start over from zero. Why? Because he had an immovable heart. He knew the ultimate strength isn't preventing failure, it's knowing you can survive hitting absolute rock bottom and still rebuild. His kingdom of the mind was completely untouched by the fire. So, this brings us to our final question, and it's a really profound one to reflect on as we wrap up. Are you building a fragile ego or an immovable heart? Are you relying on the incredibly shaky foundation of what other people think of you? Or are you ruling your own kingdom of the mind? The next time you feel that sting of comparison or self-pity or just the crushing weight of a daily struggle, remember Diogenes and his barrel. And remember that the sun will without a doubt rise again. Stop grandstanding, do the work, and build your roots. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this toolkit serves you well out there.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're taking a super fascinating, almost clinical look into the spiritual and psychological framework outlined in the book Unshakable Mind. We're going to examine a concept that's captivated human imagination for millennia, but we're looking at it through a very specific structural lens. We're breaking down the anatomy of what the source text defines as evil spirits.
Now, when you hear the phrase evil spirits, right away your mind probably jumps to, horror movies or those spooky campfire ghost stories we all grew up with. But I want to challenge that traditional worldview right out of the gate. The source text we're analyzing today completely pivots away from the idea of external monsters hiding in the dark. Instead, it presents this incredibly profound internal psychological framework. It actually suggests that these entities are intimately tied to the human mind and our everyday actions. So, let's establish our baseline definition exactly as the text lays it out. According to the source, an evil spirit is essentially an entity born from humanity's negative thoughts, emotional distortions, and the misuse of personal freedom. And to be perfectly clear here, the text posits that these entities aren't just random demons popping out of a void. They're the direct byproducts of our own negative energy. They're people, or the spiritual remnants of people, who have lived under the heavy influence of malice, greed, or just fundamental misunderstandings. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to look at 1. Origins of evil spirits. 2. Religious spirits. 3. Lustful spirits. 4. Animal spirits. 5. Vengeful spirits. And finally, 6. Protecting your inner light. Section 1. Origins of evil spirits. The price of freedom.
The text makes a really compelling argument here. It explains that human freedom, specifically our freedom of thought and action, is kind of the ultimate catalyst for the dark spiritual realm. It posits this fundamental clash, right? Individual freedom is absolutely crucial for human growth. But when people exercise their freedom in ways that conflict with others, or when they just misuse that freedom entirely, it creates a distortion. Constructive freedom leads to harmony and progress. Misused freedom, on the other hand, generates spiritual friction. And the resulting negative energy from that distortion is exactly what the text defines as evil. So, in a weird way, the existence of evil is framed simply as the price we pay for the gift of autonomy.
Moving on to Section 2. Religious spirits, the trap of selfish salvation. This first clinical case study is super interesting because it deals with folks who actively sought out spirituality but did so with totally distorted intentions. The source text describes these entities with this exact quote. They pursue happiness in a self-centered, egoistic way, thinking, as long as I am okay, that is enough. The text explains that these spirits are born when people seek salvation through false beliefs and entirely selfish motives. They want all their problems magically solved without having to actually change their own hearts. So they flock to groups or shamans who promise to just pray away their suffering. And because their desire for salvation is purely egoistic, they end up trapped in a self-centered spiritual state after passing, constantly seeking relief but never finding it, simply because they refuse to self-reflect. Let's move to Section 3 to see how this builds. Lustful spirits, the loss of reason. So this profile shifts from the trap of false belief over to the complete loss of human rationality. And the text provides a really relatable everyday example for this. Imagine someone who's normally level-headed, but after a super long day at work, they go out drinking with colleagues. Slowly, their rational control paralyzes, and they just let base instinct override their judgment. They're out wandering the streets, driven entirely by sensory desire. The source asserts that individuals who consistently stumble like this, who abandon the rational control that literally makes them human in favor of pure instinctual desire, create massive distortions in their mind. And those distortions act like a beacon, attracting lustful spirits who share that exact same wavelength. pulling the person even further down. Section 4. Animal spirits. Regression to base desires. This category focuses on what happens when human dignity doesn't just slip a little, but entirely regresses to an animalistic state. According to the text, when humans become totally dominated by base desires, they align themselves spiritually with animals. We're talking about a relentless obsession with eating, a mere survival instinct devoid of any higher purpose, or intense, burning jealousy and deep vindictiveness. The text argues that people consumed by these raw, unrefined emotions degrade their spiritual standing so much that they reduce themselves to an energetic level akin to foxes, tanukis, or snakes. It's absolutely wild to think about, but the text points out that in the spiritual realm, which is a world of pure thought, this cruelty can literally manifest into a snake-like form. What you think shapes your actual appearance there. So if a person's inner mind is exceptionally cruel, vindictive, and relentlessly resentful, they don't just act like a snake. In the spiritual realm, their form literally morphs into a snake-like entity. Their outer appearance becomes an exact reflection of their inner ugliness. Which brings us to Section 5, Vengeful Spirits, the Weight of a Grudge. Now, these entities are driven almost entirely by the heavy weight of deeply held grudges. And this introduces, honestly, one of the most chilling concepts in the whole text, the living spirit, or ikiryo. The source explains that a person doesn't even need to be dead to create an evil spirit. Let that sink in for a second. If a living person projects intensely strong, continuous feelings of hatred, jealousy, or resentment towards someone else, that negative thought energy physically manifests as an entity. This living grudge can attach to the target, causing them to feel physically exhausted, sluggish, or even sick without any medical explanation. It is literally the weaponization of a bad attitude. Finally, Section 6. Protecting your inner light, the ultimate defense. Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom, I promise. How do we actually deal with this invisible ecosystem? Well, the crucial point is captured perfectly in this universal law highlighted by the text, like attracts like. The whole crux of the philosophy here is that an evil spirit cannot just attach to you randomly. There's no way. They require an invitation. They only attach to us if our own mental distortions, our own anxieties, or our own anger match their wavelength. If your mind is peaceful and bright, they simply cannot interact with you. And honestly, this is a massive paradigm shift. Instead of just looking at these entities as, attackers out to get us, the source suggests looking at them as harsh tutors. If you're suffering from these negative attachments, it's basically a mirror revealing your own mental sickness. The text points out that blaming others for our misfortunes, saying it's my boss's fault or society's fault, is the exact mindset that makes us a magnet for these entities in the first place. So, what's the actual treatment here? How do you build what the author calls an unshakable mind? First up, practice deep self-reflection. Really look inward when things go wrong. Second, absolutely stop blaming others for your misfortune. You gotta take ownership. And third, cultivate and emit a strong inner light. The text emphasizes this beautiful point. You don't fight the darkness directly. You don't try to wrestle with evil spirits. You simply turn up your own inner light by practicing gratitude, positive thinking, and self-responsibility, and the darkness naturally vanishes. We've definitely covered a lot of profound territory today, from the misused freedom that sparks all this negative energy, right through to the specific ways our minds can kind of warp into religious, lustful, animalistic, or vengeful states. But the big takeaway from this source material is one of immense personal power and responsibility. If the spiritual world is truly just a mirror reflecting our inner state, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. What is your mind attracting today? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep your inner light shining bright and keep reflecting. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into Chapter 4 of our source text, which breaks down a truly fascinating spiritual taxonomy, specifically focusing on the various types of evil spirits. We so often think of supernatural entities as things completely separate from us, right? Like monsters hiding under the bed or ghosts haunting some abandoned house. But what if they're actually direct reflections of our own human psychology? Today, we're going to reframe these entities, not as random ghouls out to get us, but as literal mirrors of the human mind. Okay, let's jump right into this core premise. The text argues that these entities aren't just arbitrary monsters. They're actually the negative energy, or as the text calls it, the minus parts, born directly from humanity's own misuse of free will. And honestly, this is a profound shift in perspective. It means we aren't just passive victims in the spiritual ecosystem. We are active participants and, well, sometimes the very creators of the darkness.
So here is our roadmap for the explainer. We'll start with the origins, then run through 4 specific categories: religious, lustful, animal, and vengeful spirits, before finishing up with the ultimate defense, the power of reflection.
All right, Section 1, Origins of Evil Spirits and the Misuse of Freedom. Let's see how the friction of human choices creates these distortions. According to the author, human beings are given this tremendous gift, free will. But when individual freedoms clash, when my desires trample over yours, or when we just prioritize total selfishness over harmony, it creates a deep psychological friction. This clash generates that minus energy, and because the spiritual world operates on a frequency of thought, this energy acts like a massive beacon, attracting like-minded entities right to the human heart. Basically, you don't get haunted by accident. You get haunted because your internal frequency perfectly matches that external shadow. Moving on to Section 2, Religious Spirits, or the Trap of False Relief. Let's look at our first specific category. Now, what's genuinely fascinating about this definition is that these spirits have absolutely nothing to do with genuine, humble faith. Instead, they're defined by a self-centered desperation. These are entities who, even after passing on, are just desperate to escape their suffering. But instead of doing the hard work of looking inward, they just want a magical fix. They want someone else to carry their burden, zero personal responsibility required. The text points out that these spirits will literally flock to groups in the physical world that promise easy, effortless salvation. They absolutely love the idea of just being saved through a quick ritual or paying someone to just pray their problems away. And ultimately, they cause massive disruption within these organizations because their motive isn't spiritual growth at all. It's just selfish escape. Up next is Section 3, Lustful Spirits and the Loss of Reason. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that these spirits represent a total collapse of human reason in favor of raw, unrestrained instinct. As humans, we're supposed to balance our natural instincts with higher reasoning. But when that balance shatters and someone lives solely for base physical desires, well, their spiritual state warps into what the text classifies as a lustful spirit. The author gives a really relatable modern example for this. He describes how these entities essentially prey on people wandering through neon-lit entertainment districts late at night. When your reason has been dulled, say by alcohol, and your rational guard drops, you suddenly become a perfect, energetic match for these spirits. They're drawn to that lowered inhibition, whispering in your ear, dragging you down to act on that same purely instinctual level. All right, Section 4, Animal Spirits, where emotion completely dominates. Now, while the text does acknowledge that literal animals have spirits, the much deeper point here is about human souls. We're talking about human souls that have completely degenerated into an animalistic state of consciousness. When someone abandons their higher dignity and gets totally consumed by raw, base emotions, things like intense jealousy, cunning vindictiveness, or cruelty, their spirit actually begins to warp into an animalistic form that matches that exact emotion. This just brilliantly highlights the psychological depth of the source material. For example, it explains how a person holding on to intense obsessive jealousy can spiritually morph into the likeness of a snake. The spirit literally takes on the form of the thoughts it harbors. So, an animal spirit possession? Most of the time, it's actually just a human soul vibrating at a severely degraded animalistic frequency. This brings us to Section 5, Vengeful Spirits and the Weight of Grudges. The destructive power here is intense. This category is entirely fueled by hatred and the absolute inability to let a grudge go. But actually, scratch that. The wildest part about this category is that these aren't always deceased entities. The text explains they can actually be living spirits, known as ikiwio in Japanese tradition. That means a living person, someone walking around right now who harbors an intense, burning resentment towards you, can unconsciously project a part of their own spirit to haunt you. The source explains that holding these kinds of grudges generate incredibly heavy, negative thought waves. And if someone is transmitting that level of resentment toward you, it can literally cause physical illness, a sudden feeling of heaviness, or intense, unexplained exhaustion. It is a really stark reminder of the actual, tangible power our negative thoughts carry, not just for ourselves, but for the people we focus them on. So, let's take a breath and look at this summary table. We can clearly link each supernatural entity directly to a relatable human psychological distortion. Religious spirits stem from selfish desires, lustful spirits from the loss of reason, animal spirits from jealousy, and vengeful spirits from deep hatred. The monsters really aren't out there somewhere. They are just amplified versions of the darkness within ourselves.
Finally, Section 6, the power of reflection and cultivating inner light. Let's talk about the solution.
The text establishes a foundational rule, and honestly, it's the ultimate key to this entire explainer. The spiritual realm operates completely on the principle that like attracts like. These spirits are only drawn to us because of our own matching flaws. A vengeful spirit simply cannot attach to a mind filled with forgiveness. A lustful spirit can't attach to a rational, grounded mind. They need an anchor, and we are the ones providing that anchor through our own negative states. Because of that law, the core mindset that acts as a giant magnet for these entities is externalizing responsibility. Whenever we blame others for our unhappiness or our failures, our mind just plunges into darkness. But on the flip side, the mindset that absolutely repels them is taking personal accountability and choosing self-reflection.
The source emphasizes that life is basically a school of trial and error. By practicing honest self-reflection, especially when we're tempted to point the finger at someone else, we change our frequency. By stopping to ask, okay, what could I have done better here? Or where did I go wrong? We fundamentally shift our internal state. We literally stop being an energetic match for the darkness. We pull up the anchor.
The author outlines these concrete steps for spiritual defense. And notice, there are no magical chants here. No complicated rituals, no dramatic Hollywood exorcisms. It is entirely about the hard, disciplined work of self-improvement. Acknowledge your flaws, stop the blame game, and practice daily self-reflection. By doing this, you generate an inner light. As the text so beautifully puts it, you don't actually need to fight the darkness directly. You just need to turn on the light within yourself to blow the darkness away.
It's an incredibly empowering, if maybe slightly daunting message. So we'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. Knowing that your mind is essentially a giant spiritual magnet and that the entities around you are just reflections of your own inner state. Based on your thoughts today, right now, what kind of energy are you attracting? Remember, it is entirely up to you to decide what you draw in. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and keep cultivating that inner light.
Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into Chapter 5 of our source text, and we're looking at something pretty fascinating, confronting what the text calls evil spirits. Now, whether you take that literally or see it as a really powerful metaphor for psychological distress and negativity, the strategies we're going to unpack for building mental resilience, they are literally a game changer. We're going to break down the step-by-step guide to completely fortifying your mind.
Okay, so here's our survival guide for your peace of mind. We're going sequentially through the author's logic today. We'll hit the source of negativity, clearing those mental clouds, the sheer power of self-reflection, embracing bright thoughts, and finally, immersion in meaningful work. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The source of negativity. So the text describes these evil spirits not as, abstract monsters hiding under your bed, but as souls suffering from a sickness of the mind. Think persistent anxiety, dissatisfaction, just a constant stream of complaints. But here's the real question. Why do we attract this negative energy in the first place? The author asks us to flip our perspective. Instead of seeing a bout of negativity as just some random, unprovoked attack from the outside, we need to treat it as an internal vulnerability. If these forces are getting to you, the text argues it's actually because there's something inside your own mind leaving the door wide open.
And that brings us to this universal law highlighted in the text: like attracts like. According to the spiritual worldview, negative spirits are naturally drawn to minds that are already clouded by things like self-pity, frustration, or maybe a sense of inferiority. Because of this, it's almost like these negative forces act as really strict tutors. If you look closely at the exact type of negativity bothering you, it'll actually reveal your own internal misalignments. Kind of makes you think, right?
Moving on to Section 2, Clearing the Mental Clouds. To help us understand how these internal vulnerabilities actually form, the author uses this brilliant weather metaphor. Imagine a sky completely covered in rain clouds. That's a clouded mind. But here's the catch. Above those clouds, the sun is always shining. That sun represents pure positivity, happiness, and spiritual light. The light itself never goes away. It's just temporarily blocked by our own mental rain clouds. So to feel that warmth again, we don't have to literally create the sun. We just need to figure out what our specific rain clouds are made of and sweep them away.
So what exactly are those clouds made of?
Well, it really boils down to a core difference in mindset. Take the clouded mind. This is when we blame the outside world. You know the drill, saying things like, the system is rigged, or my company treats me terrible, or even, I was just born into the wrong family. The text flags this outward transfer of responsibility as the classic behavior of someone totally consumed by negative energy. The cure? The reflective mind. This demands absolute, radical personal accountability. The moment you start blaming others, you're basically rolling out the red carpet for negativity.
Section 3. Power of self-reflection. To patch up these vulnerabilities and honestly just stop blaming the world, the text introduces our main line of defense, self-reflection. And this is deeply anchored in the Buddhist concept of the Eightfold Path. The progression kicks off with right effort, which is striving to improve yourself, but doing it humbly, without a trace of arrogance. Negativity absolutely loves arrogance. After that comes right mindfulness. This means actively and constantly checking your daily thoughts, and the second you feel them drifting into complaint or anxiety, you actively steer them back toward the light.
The crucial takeaway here is that this kind of rigorous daily self-reflection acts like a polishing process for your mind. The source text explains that negativity loves to prey on our extremes, right? Those dark gaps, those weird little dents, or an overinflated ego. By reflecting every single day, you literally smooth out those edges. You end up creating this polished, perfectly balanced self that has zero gaps or dents for external negativity to hook onto.
Section 4. Embracing bright thoughts.
Okay, but what do you do when you're already stuck deep in the dark? This is where we shift from defense to offense. The text introduces a concept called bright thought. This is a super proactive method for breaking through those really intense periods of spiritual darkness. And the text is super clear about this. Trying to directly fight or wrestle with darkness and negative spirits is incredibly difficult. You'll just exhaust yourself. Instead, this principle elegantly shifts your strategy. You just use all of your energy to turn on the light.
Think about it like this. Picture a completely pitch-black room. You can't just scoop the darkness out with a bucket, right? But the second you light a single candle, it instantly banishes the darkness from that entire room. Emitting your own internal light by deliberately focusing on bright, positive, constructive thoughts does the exact same thing. It naturally repels negative energy. You don't fight the dark, you just shine.
Section 5. Immersion in meaningful work.
So, once you've done the work, you've reflected on your flaws, you've lit that internal candle, how do you make absolutely sure the negativity doesn't just come right back? The answer here is self-conviction and immersion. By building strong self-conviction and maintaining a deep immersion in work for the sake of others, you occupy your mind so completely that no new gaps can even form. The text points out something really interesting. People who suffer a lot from negativity usually have way too much idle time, and that creates a gap in the heart where anxiety just creeps right in. Whether you throw yourself into a dedicated career, start a demanding new course of study, or dive deep into a creative pursuit, fully devoting yourself to a constructive task leaves literally no room for evil spirits to enter. It forces you to look forward, and it turns all your past struggles into incredibly valuable teachers.
And when you apply all these techniques, when you diagnose your rain clouds, practice daily self-reflection, emit bright thoughts, and really immerse yourself in meaningful work, you cultivate what the author calls an unshakable mind. You become as sturdy and resilient as a deeply rooted tree, standing totally firm no matter what external pressures or negative forces the world throws at you.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. What mental rain clouds will you clear today to let your own light shine through? Take a moment to really ask yourself how you can apply these steps right now. How can you stop blaming the external world, take radical personal responsibility, and permanently fortify your own peace of mind? Thanks so much for exploring this with us today. Keep striving toward the light.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open the teachings of the book Fudoshin, and we're zeroing right in on the incredibly powerful lessons from Chapter 5, which is all about confronting evil spirits. We're going to focus on building some profound mental resilience and really confronting those inner struggles that constantly hold us back. So if you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by negativity and thought, how do I actually build an unshakable mind? Well, you're in exactly the right place. It's a pretty fascinating question, right? Why is it that some people just seem to naturally attract negativity, spiraling into anxiety and despair, while others, well, they just remain completely unshaken, even when there's total chaos all around them? Seriously, what are the invisible forces actually at play in our daily lives? And honestly, more importantly, how do our own mental vulnerabilities invite those forces right in? It's something we literally all experience, but we very rarely actually understand it. To get to the bottom of this, we're looking directly at the foundational text, Fudoshin,
which translates to the immovable heart. Specifically, we're digging into the insights from Chapter 5. And what's great is that this chapter doesn't just give us vague philosophy. No, it provides a highly specific, totally practical methodology for keeping overwhelming negativity, what the text actually calls evil spirits, meaning those heavy clouds of anxiety, fear, and toxic energy, keeping all of that firmly at bay.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 1, the law of same wavelengths, 2, clearing your mental clouds, 3, reflection as ultimate defense, 4, the power of bright thought, 5, immersion in meaningful work, and finally, 6, forging an immovable heart. Section 1, the law of same wavelengths. Okay, before we can even think about building an immovable heart, we have to accurately diagnose the root cause of our negative attachments. The text introduces this absolutely vital concept called the demons of one's own heart. It basically says, look, we don't just randomly fall victim to bad energy out of nowhere. Actually, there's a law of same wavelengths at play. And this law dictates that like attracts like, meaning we actually attract external negativity through our own internal state of mind. Those secret grudges we hold on to, the little complaints we mutter under our breath every day, our hidden anxieties, all of those vulnerabilities act like a massive magnet for external dark forces. Now, this concept totally reframes how we understand hardship. Instead of looking at negativity as just some random external threat or, an unfair attack by the universe, the source suggests looking at it as a strict home tutor. Think about that for a second. If you're suffering, that negativity is actually doing you a huge favor. It's stepping in as a tutor, pointing exactly to the unrefined, vulnerable areas of your own heart that desperately need your attention and growth right now. Section 2, clearing your mental clouds. So let's look at what a vulnerable, susceptible mind actually looks like, according to these teachings. Imagine a vulnerable mind as being completely covered in thick, heavy rain clouds. Feelings of anxiety, fear, and dissatisfaction, they act exactly like those clouds. They block out the spiritual light and create this gloomy, damp environment where negativity absolutely thrives. So our goal is to clear those clouds out entirely, letting the sun naturally illuminate the mind. Because when that light shines through, it literally leaves zero room for shadows to exist.
Section 3, reflection as ultimate defense.
This is our first actionable prescription to combat those mental clouds. The text uses a wonderfully vivid metaphor here. It says that self-reflection, actively looking back at your day, re-examining your thoughts and mistakes through the lens of the Eightfold Path, which is essentially a core framework for ethical and mindful living, is like burning a mosquito coil. Just like mosquitoes absolutely despise the thick smoke of repellent, negative entities hate the energy of a person actively correcting their thoughts. This rigorous, super honest self-reflection acts as your ultimate, impenetrable defensive shield. Section 4, the power of bright thought. Once you've got your defense set up through reflection, it's time to go on the offensive with a massive, proactive mental shift. The crucial point here is bright thought, and the logical premise behind this is just incredibly empowering. Think about being in a pitch-black room. You can't just manually scoop the darkness out with your hands, right? No matter how hard you try. The only way to make the darkness disappear is to just turn on a light. Bright thought is that light. It's the active, daily practice of keeping your mind positive and totally filled with light, fundamentally shattering any of that creeping darkness. The author uses another fantastic analogy for this. A dark street naturally invites a thief, but if you increase the number of street lamps on that block, the thief is suddenly afraid to even go there. By actively increasing your internal light, you naturally repel negativity. The text even points to Thomas Edison. It's wild to think about, but Edison famously found thousands of ways that didn't work before finally perfecting the light bulb. By using bright thought, he didn't see darkness in those failures. He transformed thousands of past mistakes into golden, illuminating learning experiences.
Section 5, immersion in meaningful work.
This is the final grounding step in our 3-part methodology. Let's see how this builds on what we just covered. When we sit around completely consumed by anxiety, overthinking every little detail of our lives, we essentially create these mental gaps. They're like empty spaces in our minds where negativity can easily slip right in. The solution? Deeply immerse yourself in purposeful work for the sake of others. When you're fully dedicated to meaningful action, contributing to something much larger than yourself, those mental gaps are completely sealed shut. There is literally no room left for darkness.
So, to summarize this incredibly powerful toolkit, first up, self-reflection acts as your defense, repairing your internal vulnerabilities. Second,
Bright thought is your offense, illuminating your mind so darkness just can't exist. And third, immersion in work fortifies the entire structure, completely removing any of those idle gaps. When you put them all together, these 3 steps form an absolute, impenetrable barrier around your mind. Section 6. Forging an immovable heart. This brings us to the ultimate goal of all these practices. This unshakable state of spiritual stability, the immovable heart, is not something you're going to achieve overnight. As the text reminds us, it's a lot like an iceberg. The visible strength you see above the water, that is entirely supported by a massive, super sturdy foundation built deep beneath the surface over a long period of time. You construct it through the daily, persistent application of reflection, bright thought, and of course, hard work. The source gives us this truly powerful closing metaphor. A mind without this foundation is like a tiny leaf, just tossed around by the turbulent waves of every passing anxiety. But a soul that is grounded in self-conviction and spiritual awareness, that's completely different. It's like a heavy ship with its anchor set deep, deep into the ocean floor. No matter how fierce the storm gets around it, that ship remains secure, resolute, and totally unwavering.
So, I want to leave you with this question to chew on. What meaningful purpose will you immerse yourself in today to anchor your own immovable heart? Remember, you absolutely have the power to clear your mental clouds, turn on the light, and seal up those gaps. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this empowers you to go out and forge your own unshakable foundation.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into Chapter 3 of our source text, which is all about confronting distress in life. We're going to explore a truly profound framework for finding genuine strength and resilience when you face those inevitable setbacks. We're looking at material that essentially breaks down the true nature of our suffering, and it gives us a highly structured philosophy for using that exact distress to forge an unshakable version of yourself.
So, what is the actual root of your suffering? Like, think about the last time you felt truly, deeply distressed. When you really analyze that feeling, does your anxiety actually come from physical reality, or is it kind of originating from somewhere else entirely? The source material we're examining today makes a really bold claim about where our pain comes from, and it challenges us to fundamentally shift how we view our daily struggles.
Okay, let's dive into this. The text gives us this incredible image of a massive, ancient tree to visually anchor what we're striving for today. The author calls it Fudo Shin, an immovable mind. Imagine having a mind that is so deeply rooted, so firmly established beneath the surface, that literally no matter how fiercely the storms of life rage around you, you just cannot be uprooted. That's the ideal we're going for.
Moving into Section 1, the root of distress. Now, to build that unshakable mind, we first have to diagnose the problem by looking at the real root of our modern anxieties.
And the text makes a fascinating observation here. It points out that our emotional distress rarely stems from the objective reality of our situation. Actually, scratch that. It's almost entirely rooted in comparing ourselves to others. We suffer because we're constantly measuring our own worth using external yardsticks, right? We look at the shifting opinions of everyone around us, we look at the successes of our peers, and we just let that external comparison totally dictate our internal peace. The friction between our feelings and the status of others, that is exactly where the vast majority of our misery is born.
To counter this, the author reframes our struggles entirely, offering this perspective. Life is a workbook of problems presenting trials suited to each soul. Think about that for a second. Difficulties aren't random punishments falling from the sky. They are highly specific tests uniquely designed to reveal your true value. Just like a workbook in a classroom, you're given problems that are meant to teach you a lesson, to test your current level of understanding, and ultimately, to help you grow.
So, if comparison is the trap, how do we escape it? Well, that brings us to Section 2, the inner kingdom.
The text sets up a brilliant contrast here. On one side, we have our modern obsession with external validation, chasing job titles, hoarding wealth, needing that peer approval. But compare that to the ancient ideal. Let's look at the Greek philosopher Diogenes. The source recounts how Diogenes famously lived in a literal barrel. When Alexander the Great, literally the most powerful man in the world at the time, came up to him and offered him anything he desired, Diogenes essentially just asked Alexander to stop blocking his sunlight. I mean, wow. He was utterly content. He didn't need the king's wealth or status to validate his existence.
So the crucial point is this concept of the kingdom of the mind. Diogenes had mastered it. It's a state of absolute contentment that is completely independent of external status, wealth, or other people's opinions. If you haven't mastered your inner kingdom, you are basically going to be a slave to outside forces forever. True resilience comes from ruling this internal world so completely that a sudden change in your external circumstances doesn't topple you from your throne.
Now, when we fail to rule that inner kingdom, we inevitably fall into the trap of self-pity. And the source material is quite harsh but necessary here. It actively warns against retreating into a victim mentality and projecting weakness to the outside world. The author uses a really striking metaphor for this. Falling into self-pity is like being a weak dog that runs away with its tail tucked between its legs. And what happens? It only invites cruel people to throw stones at it. By projecting that you're defeated, you're actually inviting more hardship. The author asserts that you simply cannot allow yourself to look or act defeated.
Okay, so how do we practically maintain our composure when things go wrong? The source offers a powerful dual-lens framework to help with this, starting with Section 3, the macro perspective.
The text calls this the macro lens. I want you to imagine taking a giant step back from your life. Zoom out to view your current problems from an infinite distance, or from a massive universal perspective. Imagine looking at your current distress through a giant telescope from a distant star. What does it actually look like from way up there?
Because from this macro view, the things that cause us massive sleepless nights suddenly look like complete trivialities. The text gives some great everyday examples. A coworker getting a promotion before you do, receiving a slightly smaller bonus than you expected, or dealing with a temporary illness at home. When you're in the middle of it, it feels like the end of the world, right? But when viewed from an infinite distance, across the vast timeline of your entire life, these are incredibly minor and fleeting events. They're just a blip on the radar.
And this brilliantly illustrates the macro view with a really comforting, timeless mantra from the text: the sun will rise again. The author reminds us that just as the sun inevitably rises after hours of dark night, your personal night is going to end too. You just have to hold on and know that the dawn is an absolute certainty.
But what on earth do we do while we wait in the dark for that sun to rise? That's where we shift gears to Section 4, the micro perspective. So we switch from the macro lens to the micro lens. This means zooming all the way in. You stop looking at the distant horizon and you focus intensely, almost obsessively, on your immediate daily tasks. You shrink your entire focus down to just today. You don't worry about tomorrow or next year. You just focus on quiet self-improvement right now, in the present moment.
Here are the exact actionable steps the source gives for weathering the storm using this micro perspective. First, immerse yourself completely in your daily work. Let it be a refuge. Second, and this is absolutely vital, avoid rash, showy moves. When people feel inadequate or they've suffered a setback, they so often try to overcompensate with grand, desperate gestures just to prove their worth. The text warns strongly against this. And finally, step 3, quietly continue to forge and improve yourself. Just do the reps. Improve a tiny bit every single day without seeking an audience or applause.
All right, let's transition to Section 5, the unpolished diamond. This offers a profoundly empowering way to reframe how we should view ourselves during these quiet periods of trial.
The author asks us to contrast two very distinct self-images. When we fail, we tend to view ourselves as a worthless pebble, something to be kicked aside, something of zero value. That's the view of self-pity and despair. But the text urges us to instead see ourselves as an unpolished diamond. A diamond in the rough doesn't look like much at first glance, but its intrinsic value is massive. It just requires time, and crucially, it requires friction to actually shine. If you think of yourself as a diamond, the more you polish it, the more it will shine. That friction you're feeling right now, that distress, that struggle, that quiet daily work you're putting in, that is the polishing process. Without the abrasive friction of life's problems, the diamond can never reveal its brilliant inner light. The struggles aren't destroying you. They are literally polishing the soul to reveal its true value.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer today. But I want to leave you with a final question to really chew on. When life inevitably applies its weight, are you going to let the pressure crush you, or will you let it polish you? You've got the framework now. Remember to step back with the macro lens to see how small the problems really are in the grand scheme, and then zoom right in with the micro lens to do the quiet work of daily improvement. Rule your inner kingdom, and you will build that immovable mind. Keep learning and keep polishing your diamond. See you next time.
Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking some seriously profound philosophy from Chapter 6 of Fudoshin, which translates to the Unshakable Mind. We're talking about how to forge a truly resilient mindset. You know, a mental framework that doesn't just barely survive adversity, but actually uses it to level up. If you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by your circumstances, you're going to want to stick around, because these structured insights are an absolute game changer.
I mean, think about it. Do you ever feel like a ship just getting totally tossed around by the unpredictable waves of life? We really have to start by acknowledging that universal anxiety, because we all feel it, right? When life's trials hit, whether that's a sudden crisis, a big failure, or honestly just the daily grind, it is incredibly easy to feel like we're at the complete mercy of fate, totally untethered. But the source material we're diving into today tackles this exact feeling head-on. It suggests that our greatest suffering doesn't actually come from those waves. It comes from our lack of an anchor.
See, when you're drifting, you're basically like a leaf on the river of fate. In that state, every tiny wave of criticism, every minor setback, completely capsizes your day. But contrast that with the anchored mind, grounded, stable, resilient against the storm. The author makes the point that the massive stability we all crave, it doesn't come from finding a perfectly calm sea. Those just don't exist. It comes from securing your mental ship so deeply that the storm literally cannot move you. So the big question is, how do we actually get there? What acts as this heavy iron anchor for our minds when everything goes dark?
Section 1. The Ultimate Mental Anchor.
Okay, so the text introduces this fascinating term, child of Buddha. Now, regardless of your personal background, the source defines this concept as your ultimate psychological anchor. It's this profound realization that you are intimately connected to the great universe's life energy and its love. It means finally recognizing that you aren't just some random isolated accident. No, you are a vital, purposeful piece of the universe's energy. You actually share the exact same fundamental nature as the cosmos itself.
And here is exactly why this matters. It's about escaping that toxic victim of fate trap. When you drop this philosophical anchor, when you genuinely internalize that you are a connected, purposeful part of the whole universe, you instantly stop believing you're a victim. You stop thinking your environment is actively out to destroy you or that your future is just doomed to be tragic. Instead of looking at a storm and thinking, the universe is punishing me, you realize you possess the exact same enduring energy as the universe. That right there, that is the bedrock of an unshakable mind. And with that anchor securely dropped, let's look at how this perspective totally reframes our relationship with adversity.
Section 2. Polishing the Rough Diamond. The author poses a really powerful question to us here. Do you see yourself as a worthless pebble or as a rough diamond waiting to be polished? This challenges exactly how you perceive your own worth when you're getting absolutely battered by life's trials. If you truly believe you're just a pebble, well, the friction of life is going to grind you down to dust. But if you hold on to that unshakable belief that your true nature is a diamond, then that exact same friction doesn't destroy you.
This is the mechanics of the unshakable mind in action. Step 1, you encounter hardship. But instead of breaking down, Step 2, you actively reframe it as a trial. Then, Step 3, you use all that intense pressure and friction to polish the soul. Until finally, Step 4, you shine brilliantly. You don't just survive the pressure, you are fundamentally improved by it. The adversity isn't there for your destruction. It's literally the necessary tool the universe uses to reveal your inner brilliance.
Which brings us to a highly comforting realization from the text, finding absolute strength at rock bottom. The source explicitly notes that the deepest trials, when you feel like you've hit absolute rock bottom, are actually what solidify your foundation. Think about it. When you hit the very bottom, there is nowhere left to fall. Finding that solid ground allows you to finally stand up, push off, and discover the true, unbreakable extent of what you can really handle. Rock bottom is where your anchor finally catches the seabed. Now, with the self fully polished and anchored, how does this unshakable mind actually show up in the real world?
Section 3. Overwhelming good thoughts.
Because true resilience, it isn't just about stubbornly gritting your teeth in total isolation. An unshakable mind naturally overflows into selfless action. When you're no longer operating out of constant fear and anxiety, you become an active part of the universe's energy. You start radiating overwhelming good thoughts. You give pure love without expecting a single thing in return. And the text emphasizes that you contribute to humanity without any rigid stubbornness, because true strength is flexible, it's generous,
and it is overwhelmingly positive. Why? Because you already know your foundational worth is entirely secure. So let's tie all these distinct concepts together to define exactly what a genuinely unshakable mind looks like in your everyday life.
Section 4. Hardship as soul nourishment. Picture a massive, enduring tree. A strong tree doesn't try to hide from the rain or the harsh wind. It absorbs them to grow taller and root even deeper. That right there is the ultimate definition of resilience. This is the true attitude of the unshakable mind, taking every single hardship, every storm, every failure, and accepting it as absolutely essential nourishment for your soul.
And this perfectly sets up one of the most beautiful concluding metaphors in the entire text. It says, "In the storm, it is a heavy iron anchor. On a sunny day, it is the mast's pillar." Man, I love that. It perfectly captures the dual nature of an unshakable mind. During fierce adversity, it's the heavy stability keeping you from washing away. But it's not just playing defense. When the weather clears up and times are peaceful, that exact same core belief transforms into the central pillar of your mast, holding up your sails so you can continue forging powerfully ahead towards your great ideals.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Really take a second to reflect on this. The next time a storm hits your life, will you let the waves break you, or will you let them polish your diamond? Remember, the anchor is already within you. You just have to choose to drop it. Keep polishing that diamond, and I'll catch you next time.